But we'll figure it out as we go. Okay. All right. So let's see if I can figure this out better. So why did I decide I wanted to do this? I think, well, for me, one, I've been thinking about this topic and these things for quite a few months now, probably a couple of years at this point. And it's kind of the integration of knowledge of things we've worked on inside the business and things I've observed inside the gym with our own clients, and thinking about people's progress and why people experience challenges and a lot of things related to being in the business of fitness. It's good to have a better understanding of how fitness integrates and the limitations of different methods for how it works with clients. And to a certain extent, knowledge building is really missing in the field of fitness. There's a lot of laboratory fitness. There's a lot of textbook fitness. There's a lot of educational fitness, but in the field of fitness, there's really quite a little, or quite not very much going on as far as knowledge generation. So I kind of have gravitated towards this idea of like really trying to write down why I feel like we do certain things. And I want to integrate that with how we actually run the business at Ironstone and how we coach fitness inside our classes and other services. My background is very psychology based. A lot of you know that, but I am an industrial psychologist by training. My area of focus is occupational health psychology, mostly related to stress, resilience, and psychological fitness, which is part of what we're going to talk about tonight. And obviously, psychological fitness and physical fitness are inextricably linked to each other. But again, the literature and especially the field practice of fitness do a really poor job of integrating those ideas and thinking about how they fall together. And lastly, you're kind of my guinea pigs, my proof of concept for this idea. This is something I've been working on and will want to communicate a little bit more formally at some point. But you got to say it out loud a couple times first and get reactions and see how people feel about it. So that's where we're at right now. Eventually, this will become a more kind of interactive, story-driven kind of presentation. Right now, it's very kind of structured and clunky, maybe is the best way to put it. But we'll see where we end up. Also, I want to talk about this because I'm a nerd, and you're here, so are you. So that's how it goes. So what I'm going to try and answer is really three things in three parts. First, what elements of fitness matter the most? There's many parts of fitness. So what's most important? What strategy for getting fit is best or most useful in a given set of situations? And at a very high level, are the needs of a sports-specific athlete different than those of an everyday general fitness client? I think that really forms the physical fitness chunk. And there's a lot of this presentation focuses on that piece because it's what unites us all and brings all of us together. The second big chunk is a very small piece, maybe 10 minutes, maybe not even that, on what I call physical stewardship. And we're going to try and answer the question of what health behaviors matter most and how do you know your own needs and how do you track them to a very low extent today. That's really a talk for another day in more detail. And then lastly, we'll dig into a bigger piece on what psychological fitness is and how it relates to these other things. And I'm going to click out of presentation, not presentation view, but I'm going to try and see everyone's faces just to see if I still have everyone, because I'm right now just talking at a PowerPoint slide deck with no faces. So that's tough. There, I'm going to focus on Dave and Paul. I have two faces to see. Make a funny face if you can't hear me anymore. So at the very end, hopefully we'll cover in some more detail how all these things are related, because obviously they are. And without further ado, on to part one. You'll also note that I was very respectful of Ironstone's new brand colors. So we're very green, black, and pink tonight. I hope you follow along. All right, so where to start? Physical fitness and what it is. People are reading probably. I want you to take 10 seconds really quickly and think about what your definition of fitness is. You probably saw some stuff flash up there. There's many definitions floating around, some of them good, some of them garbage. But think about what physical fitness is. You don't have to type it out. Those are probably too long, but try and grab a hold of something. Eric's like quoting the level 1 handbook out loud right now. That's okay. It's all right, buddy. I got you. All right. So there's a bunch of definitions of physical fitness floating around out there. Some of them come from or through what some people might know as the CrossFit Level 1 Handbook, but those didn't come from nowhere either. Most of those are integrated ideas that have been pulled from articles and texts and other resources over the years that have just kind of been cleaned up and polished into an understandable format. The biggest criticism of fitness until probably 10, 15 years ago was that there was no good working definition of fitness that people could use to understand what it was or how to improve it. There was a lot of wave top kind of idea based versions of the definition of fitness. For example, the green block there, the ability to carry out daily tasks with vigor and alertness without undue fatigue. Okay, sure. I suppose that's the definition of fitness if we think about it in that sense. The ability to meet the physical demands imposed on you by your environment. That's a very Darwinian version of fitness. We're talking about survival here. You know, T-Rex chases you. Well, I guess T-Rex has probably never chased humans, but that's not my area of expertise. You know, bear chases you in the woods. You run away fast. You survive. You're fit, kind of thing. You are able to reproduce and carry on the lineage. You know, that's a very workable definition of fitness. It's actually very accurate, but it actually carries over well to everyday life. But the problem is it's not very quantifiable. We're not getting chased by many bears these days. So I can't be like, Dave chased by 6 bears, beat 5, lost to 1. Dave is 5/6 fit, unfortunately. CrossFit loves the definition of work capacity across broad time and modal domains, a measure of power output, which is a very quantitative definition of fitness, but it works really well for measuring and computing fitness, but not really great for expressing how it works in your everyday life in general. So we have to kind of integrate some of these ideas together to form a picture of what fitness is. And some might think of it as an effort to improve quality of life and hedge against chronic disease, which is probably a more medical definition of fitness. But all of these have some merit or some value. From the definition of fitness, we get to a place where we're talking about elements of fitness, because fitness is not just one thing. If you were to think right now about who there's a lot of CrossFit people in this room, so you're going to say, who's the fittest person on earth? And someone's going to say, Matt Frazier. That's, how we all feel. But that's because we're indoctrinated into the club of CrossFit, right? If you were to go ask your neighbor or your cousin that's never heard of this before, who the fittest person on earth is, it's going to be probably Ironman triathlete, someone in the Olympics, or someone in a documentary they saw one time that seemed like they were super fit. And it's going to be based on their perception of what fitness is. There's elements of fitness. Go back one here. There's the green ones, the green bars on this table are ones that appear in more than one place. In particular, they appear in both the basis of the CrossFit theory, the handbook and all that stuff, but also in the NSCA, the National Strength and Conditioning Association in the States. But they also use 2 more, which are in the pink, and that's body composition and reaction time. And I'll come back to those in a second. As far as those being elements of fitness, I think that's debatable because they might be something else. But the NSCA breaks down these components or elements of fitness into 2 categories. They call one group health aspects of fitness, and they call another group skill-related aspects or sport-specific skills or athletic skills in many variances related to fitness. So they kind of separate these into 2 groups. Now, I said I'd come back to these. I will argue, probably till I'm blue in the face, if someone was going to, that body composition and reaction time are not elements of physical fitness in the sense of being trainable skills or practicable skills. They are outcomes of many things. And in some cases, they're innate characteristics. For example, reaction time, there's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that there's a strong kind of genetic component to reaction time, along with a big practice effect for the specific skill you're working on, and perception related to visual acuity and many other things. But as far as considering them elements of fitness that we would think about training in the gym, I'm not about to start a tennis ball launcher in Ironstone and fire tennis balls at you and ask you to catch them and then measure reaction time. And that's not something we would ever spend time on. So I'm going to throw out reaction time and throw out body composition for the purposes of this discussion. Let's see if I can stay on track here. I lost something there. Well, something's frozen in my animations, but that's okay. So the interesting thing about the top bar is that those are physical training skills. So those are things you have to train to get better at. You have to have a progressive plan. You have to add reps, volume, sets, intensity, some amount of training progress in order to get better at those things. Things on the bottom, they are, for the most part, neurological skills. They're things you practice to get better at. So there doesn't necessarily have to be a set training plan with progression and volume and all these other things. It's more of a practice effect. You do it, you get better at it. Think of, in particular, about accuracy, agility, and coordination. Speed and power, but the star there, are a little bit different. They require both practice and training in order to get better at it, which means you have to neurologically change and you have to physically change in order to become faster or more powerful. And of course, the power being, more work and less time, as if we're going to define it in simple terms. So this kind of brings us to the first answer, the first question. What aspects of health matter most? What elements of fitness matter most for everyday health? And I would contend that of those many elements of fitness, the three most important for general physical health, for everyday life, for most of the definitions of fitness that we saw in the early slide, are cardiorespiratory endurance, strength, and flexibility. And I've kind of organized these into a triangle. Triangles in life are interesting because they're really strong when the corners are bound together strong, when they're supported. But when you don't have strong corners, triangles collapse very, very easily. And this is really true of these elements of fitness. You can be really strong with really good endurance, but if you have really poor flexibility, you're still going to be super injury prone, and may very much impair your fitness. If you are very, very flexible and have very, very good endurance, but aren't particularly strong or have limited strength, you're going to have significant impairments by every definition of fitness that we covered in the beginning. So you're going to be able to meet the demands of everyday life. Well, depending on how extreme that score is, if you can't lift your groceries, carry the coach up the stairs, pick up your kid, do the basics from a strength perspective, you cannot meet the demands of everyday life. If you're not flexible enough to bend down and pick your keys up off the floor, you can't meet the demands of everyday life. If you can't walk from the couch to upstairs without being heavily winded, for many reasons, you, in that particular instance, can't meet the demands of everyday life. And it's kind of my argument that these three things are critical to your overall quality of life and ability to meet the basic requirements of kind of everyday societal existence, at least how we see them now. Now, there's some exceptions to this, but you don't have to go far to find practical personal examples of these things. If you've ever hurt your back and struggled to bend down to put your socks on because of it, inherently that limitations in flexibility have a very big impact on how you operate in your built environment. How you get in and out of the car, it's hard to get into the car in those situations, in and out of bed, it can be very challenging. And we know practical examples of people in our lives, if you probably think about it, that you would think of as not being particularly fit, and you could probably place their core problem into one of these three categories, based on this triangle. So I'll pause there for a second while we digest. I think it's also important to recognize that this model to begin or contends that if you put too much pressure on one area alone, it can also collapse the triangle. So a really good example of this is like the person who spends all their time in the squat rack powerlifting and no time on cardio and no time on flexibility, right? We know of both directions that can go. It can go in the direction of physical injury due to lack of range of motion. It can go in the direction of like heart attack, heart disease, because there's no care for the internal process or cardiorespiratory system, right? So starting from this point, I think makes a lot of sense. And if we think about it in practical terms, we can use it to kind of situate some things that we're super familiar with. So if you were to take, for example, a boot camp class and drop it on the triangle here, it's somewhere between strength and cardio, more towards cardio. It's on the triangle somewhere. It projects kind of this outer ring somewhere into our triangle of fitness here and can cover off some aspects. Same if we were to take something really pure, like a yin yoga class that is very slow, very deep, very stretchy, not a lot of flow, not a lot of stability or power. It'd be at the extreme corner. It would be down in the bottom. We project some kind of circle in our overall fitness triangle, some distance from that thing. And the amount that circle will project will really depend on a few things, but it will really be about the breadth of the stimulus. So if I use running as an example, or go back to that yoga example, if we were a treadmill only runner, our circle at the point of cardiorespiratory endurance would be much smaller than someone who also runs trails, hills, and sprints, because there's more strength, power, and speed elements built into some of those other practices of running. And this would include things like volume and training variety, etc. But if your only thing was like, I get on the treadmill, I do 30 minutes, I get off the treadmill, there would be a limited bubble, so to speak, around the fitness effect that that thing would have. And to be in a reasonable form of health, you need to cover off the points, not necessarily at the center of a circle, but you have to cover off the points, the three basic points of flexibility, strength, and cardiorespiratory endurance, at least in some amount, right? So this is super theoretical. There's no metric here that determines the size of the circles I've drawn. This is purely theoretical. I'm just dropping them on the page, trying to make a point. So just keep that in mind. You can't get out your ruler and like measure what I'm getting at here. So why those traits? I've talked about it a little bit already. The real question you want to answer is, why are people hospitalized or moved to a home in their older age, or hospitalized or unable to do things without assistance? You know, in this chat alone, we have quite a few healthcare professionals. I know Tiff's in the group, outpatient physiotherapy, orthopedics, like probably sees a lot of stuff from this triangle. You know, we have doctors in here as well. They see a lot of stuff from this triangle that are glaring issues with strength, flexibility, mobility, and cardiorespiratory endurance. And that's just related to the purely physical elements of physical fitness that we're talking about right now. The needs of an athlete, or the traits that describe an athlete, are quite different from what we expect as a minimum quality of life standard. They're actually almost a different set of traits. Cardiorespiratory endurance is still there, although in a slightly different capacity. But for most athletes, the things that manifest excellence, the things we take notice of, are cardiorespiratory endurance, muscular endurance, balance and stability, agility, accuracy, and coordination, and power and speed. They're those elements of fitness. When we watch sports live, for an example, we don't really see strength. We see the result of strength. We see power and speed and muscular endurance in practice. You require many other traits to manifest a particular skill with a specific sport. But when we think about the general physical requirements out of those early elements of fitness that we went through, it's really these five, to a certain extent, that define what an athletic person or an athlete, by the traditional sense of the term, looks like. And the most obvious traits of an athlete are always, almost without fail, power and speed. That's what differentiates between the people we think are the top athletes and those that are kind of a lower tier. Power and speed. in almost any sport, regardless of the other skills required. So I'll take a basketball example because it's my sport. It's what I love. LeBron James, one of the thing that makes him so dominant beyond his size and his ability is, for his size, he has an obscene burst speed down the court and power to get to the rim that is not really reflected in many other players. And you look at him and you go, that individual, that guy could be so successful in any sport he chooses. He could be a wide receiver on a football field. He could probably push a bobsled. He's just so powerful. And you see the athleticism, the raw talent in that individual. And that's what you're seeing on camera. And it's supported by those other traits. If you, again, were to take most sports, and we'll talk about athletic sports, things we watch on TV, things people cheer about, you can probably put them somewhere inside this diamond, and they're going to overlap various parts of this diamond to more or lesser extent. But they're in this diamond somewhere, and almost guaranteed they overlap with power and speed in some way. So like hockey, probably a little bit less endurance, a little bit more on the balance stability requirement, right? You're on skates, you're bumping into people, there's that whole piece. Soccer, you're pretty a little bit more on the endurance side, not so much balance and stability. I mean, they fall over when somebody blows on their ear, so that's fine. But the point is they're still in the diamond, and where exactly is entirely debatable. Again, I've just dropped some circles on a PowerPoint slide here, but they're in this formation. So if you're to just think about the triangle I put up and then the diamond, you go, okay, maybe the needs of a high level athlete and an everyday person are a little bit different as far as what they should be focusing on. And I think we would all accept that premise, and it's valuable. Just like with our general physical skills, our specificity and our training time will determine the size of the circle. So we'll take a generic example that is maybe not a pro sport. We'll take someone who trains MMA for fun. They go to Titans MMA, they punch a bag, they wrestle, they do jujitsu, they train, they skip. They're in this circle somewhere. We'll all agree that that is a sport. It requires a high degree of athleticism to participate, and the more professional they are at that sport, the bigger the circle is going to be. So the needs of the UFC fighter are going to require far more balance and stability and far more cardiorespiratory endurance from the center of that circle, and all the power and speed, agility, accuracy, and coordination that go with it, than compared to a recreational MMA for fitness fighter. I think we can all accept that. The circle gets smaller or bigger depending on training volume, intensity, breadth of experience, and many other things. So this is kind of the model that we have made our way to of athletic performance. And why these traits? Again, we could have picked any of them. So why these ones? Well, first, I already covered this one. It's what's obvious on TV. When you look at someone and go, that person's an athlete, then why is this person showing up? So you think about Venus and Serena Williams. I challenge you to find a trait that defines them that is not in this diamond I've dropped on the screen here. You look at that individual and you go, that person's an athlete. Power and speed, agility, accuracy, coordination, balance and stability. Yeah, it's definitely there. Muscular endurance. Sometimes tennis matches last hours and hours and hours, right? So we can definitely make the argument that it's what's apparent on TV. The other is back to the earlier question I asked of who do people name as the fittest on the planet? The fittest group of people. So if we think about classic examples of this, a lot of people, before 15 years ago would have probably said decathlon in the Olympics. And we can think about what the decathlon events test. They're pretty much all in this, like they're in this diamond, right? So they have moderate to long distance running. Yeah, cardiorespiratory endurance, muscular stamina. They have long jump, triple jump, high jump, power and speed, balance and stability, accuracy and coordination. They have all the throws, power and speed, accuracy and coordination. It's all there, right? You think about decathlon, it is this diamond. They don't test strength. They don't test flexibility. They're not in this group. You think about Ironman triathlon. Well, that is an obscene amount of muscular endurance and cardiorespiratory endurance. And the ones that do really well are also a bit on this power and speed spectrum. Maybe not as much as like a power and speed athlete, but you don't ride a bike far fast up and down hills without having some degree of power and speed at that level. And Free Solo, even if you've seen the movie or the documentary Free Solo, his name escapes me at this exact moment, but I will say very, very confident individual who climbed for 6 hours without a harness up one of the hardest pitches in the world. The degree of muscular endurance, power and speed to move from hold to hold, balance and stability, agility, accuracy, and coordination required to pull that off is unparalleled. So you think about you name the fittest people on the planet, they fall into this diamond somewhere, or at least I'll argue that tonight. So we end up with this integrated model of fitness that really takes the two layers of general fitness and athletic performance and kind of puts them together into a model that relates the different elements of fitness to each other in some way as they fall on some kind of continuum. So you'll notice that muscular endurance falls between strength and cardiorespiratory endurance in this little model. It's not perfect. It's not going to be a perfect shape. It's not 3D. This is something I came up with on a napkin, so it's probably not going to be perfect, and it might not even survive deep analysis if we were to break out the textbooks, but it's useful for talking about the idea of physical fitness. And it's useful because it can tell us a few things about how we might think about fitness from this model. So the first is that the classic day split gym model that many of us probably followed before we found CrossFit can work just fine for health, but it won't recreate their conditions of an athlete. So I'll take this example. Can someone actually give me a thumbs up? Can you even see my mouse if I move it around on the screen, or am I just waving my mouse around? Oh, you can. Okay, good. So if we take a classic kind of, I'll call it my bro split, something I used to do before I came to CrossFit. I did probably 3 bodybuilding days. I'm somewhere over here in this quadrant with my bodybuilding days. I ran on the treadmill or through the city a couple times a week, and I probably took a yoga class at Moksha at least, once a week. So was I covering off all the basic elements of health and fitness? Yes. Were all the points of the triangle covered by what I was doing? Yes. Was it recreating the conditions of athletics? Was I working on power and speed, balance, coordination, accuracy, or any of those pieces? No. It works. It's very sustainable. It's very easy for the average gym goer to think about, okay, how do I cover off these 3 corners of the triangle? I'm going to do 3 different activities 2 times a week that cover off these 3 corners, and it can work really, really, really well. And this can also be super helpful for helping people diagnose what they're missing. So the second takeaway from thinking about the fitness model this way is that people often don't realize what part of the triangle they are neglecting. We call it it's all fitness effect, or like if you do 1 or 2 things really, really frequently, you think you're getting everything you need because you're really dedicated to that one thing. So I've used the example here of a spin class and going to a lot of yoga, right? So you're perspiring heavily, your legs burn, you're working really hard. Okay, spin class, you think you've got it covered. And then yoga, you think you've got it covered. So between those 2 things, you probably think you're good to go. Well, the reality is that you're not really covering off strength, especially as it relates probably to upper body long-term, even in the most basic sense. And that adding 1 day a week of strength machine circuits in Fit for Less could cover that corner of the triangle off and kind of shore up a big long-term weakness in your fitness strategy. And it wouldn't be that difficult to diagnose that deficiency based on this kind of model and implement some kind of strategy to address it. And that can work really well. It also, as a corollary, kind of tells us that if people have one thing that they really, really, really love as a hobby, we can find things that fit with that cover off the parts we're missing, just by thinking about where that hobby would fall in our magic triangle that's made up. The third thing that we can learn from this is that classic strength and conditioning can also work really well and does work really effectively for athletes by focusing on building each specific trait and where areas of weakness might be. So we take this example, we have a theoretical athlete that has some things covered off, but isn't particularly strong, isn't particularly fast or powerful, and may be lacking in accuracy, coordination, and agility. so that's an action plan, right? We see which parts are deficient in, and we take action to address those specific things with training methodologies that are designed to specifically address those problems or deficits. And we make the athlete a better athlete. We cover off the things that they're weak at. It also can explain or partly explain why the concept of only playing sports, especially in youth, but as we age, and having no fitness or strength and conditioning base is particularly prone to injury. And that's because most sports exist within the diamond to some extent. And the more recreational that sport is, the smaller our circle is. So what ends up happening is we play a lot of the sport. We move around inside the diamond or sports a lot, but we don't really address the three fundamental parts of physical fitness that are actually keeping us healthy long-term, right? We don't really address the three areas that need it the most. The circle doesn't cover it off. So this model can work to explain why that approach can be bad. It also can work to explain the CrossFit model of fitness to a certain extent, which is interesting. And part of the reason why it even exists in the first place is trying to integrate these different ideas and how these different approaches might fit in my head. And I think a lot in pictures, so that's what I'm showing you a lot of. So if we think about CrossFit as instead of being a weakness specific model or an around the outside or an outside in model, CrossFit is an inside out model of fitness. And for the purposes of this, I've removed the power icon from the middle of our little triangle here because the actual definition of fitness in CrossFit is power produced, and all of the workouts are measured based on power output if we were going to think about what the CrossFit definition of fitness is. So rather than trying to create power as far as like a measured part of fitness, CrossFit is concerned with sustaining power over broad time and modal domains. That is the definition. So we think about fitness that way, starting from that point in the center, working outwards, we can use it to explain a few things about CrossFit as well and what is good. This model in front of me is a Metcon only or a mostly Metcon CrossFit gym. They do almost only chippers, rounds for times, fight gone bad style workouts, a lot of sweaty Metcons. That's their whole thing. This is a very frequent gym archetype. If you look through the kind of many gyms in the States, this is very common. And that happens because clients become very attracted to or addicted to the Metcon madness, showing up, getting their butt kicked, and leaving. It's what they love, and gyms start to do more of it, the more clients love it, and so on and so on. But you can see it comes from a good place, but that perspective of Metcon only creates a similar problem to what sport only type fitness creates. And that is, it doesn't cover off some of the core aspects of health. And in particular, because of where the circles start, it doesn't really cover off some of the things that keep you safe, like balance and stability, flexibility and mobility, and coordination and balance. So it can tell us a few things about how we should treat CrossFit athletes. First, it tells us why scaling Metcons appropriately matters, because when you scale a Metcon appropriately in CrossFit terms, you are trying to preserve power output. That is the definition of scaling in CrossFit terms, which means you are trying to keep the epicenter, the center of my circle, in the middle of the cross. If you are not preserving power, that circle moves in a direction. So you're either becoming more cardio based, you're either moving more towards a strength workout, or something else, but you're not preserving power output, which means you're not keeping the circle in the center if you're not scaling appropriately. The second is that Metcon only CF takes a long time to progress in the eyes of a client for a reason, and it's because it starts from the middle and works outwards. And there's a lot of barriers to getting to the corners. The corners are what people see as progress: improved strength, improved range of motion, improved cardiorespiratory endurance. But it takes time in the CrossFit Metcon model to get there because we're working from the inside out. It's power-based. You have to cover off aspects of balance, coordination, and accuracy. You have to learn technique. You have to get a little bit stronger in order to use heavier weights in workouts. If you keep using light weights, you don't get stronger. And this can be a bit of a cycle for clients. So clients in the Metcon only model might be very enthused with the sweat aspects of CrossFit, but may find that especially over time, they have difficulty seeing progress because they're not seeing the three main corners covered off, and they're not seeing that continuous growth that's tangible, that's easier to see in their everyday life. So you have to coach clients to understand that progress in the CrossFit model takes a long time. It's what we call the low trajectory on a distant horizon in Ben Bergeron speak, which basically translates to we're going to move slow and steady little by little instead of try and make you really strong or really fast or have exceptional endurance in the next couple of weeks, right? We're trying to bring everything up at once. And that happens because we're working from the middle out. The follow-on effect to that is that good programming in a CrossFit gym focuses on the middle. It is center out based, but it attacks the corners in the program. We call that pushing the boundaries of your experiences. In practical terms in the gym, that means pushing some workouts into the corners of this triangle to cover off specific aspects of fitness. So you'll see we do strength specific workouts to attack the strength corner of the triangle that's not covered off in most of our Metcon based programs. We do things like mobility, yoga, and some types of exercises like overhead squats, for example, to attack some of the range of motion and flexibility aspects of the fitness triangle. And the same with cardio. We have the burn class, right? So a well-rounded program lives in the middle, but really through variance in the daily programming pushes athletes into the corners and edges of the triangle. You know, durability is a piece that really lives kind of in this balance, stability, strength kind of quadrant down at the bottom as it relates to the triangle. Follow on, games athletes need to focus on the corners more because the games test the corners more. The games are not everyday life, but the games tend to test the edges and not the middle of the model. So if we think about the CrossFit Games that just happened, you know, they did a 10-kilometer trail run, cardiorespiratory endurance, stamina, muscular endurance. They did CrossFit Total. So they were down in the bottom left corner here, testing strength. They did things like handstand walks and so on, right? So they're testing stability and balance. They did overhead kettlebell carries while walking lunges down the field. There's a bunch of parts along the edges that really get attacked in the CrossFit Games. And the follow-on is not that you need to train like a games athlete, it's that they need to train the way they do because they are specifically tested on those domains of fitness more than you are in everyday life. You just need to cover off the corners. They need to be strong in the corners of the triangle as athletes. And that a new client, the other follow-on to this idea is that a new client who has a base of fitness in cardio, strength, gymnastics, and a good range of motion will make faster progress in CrossFit for a reason. It's because the corners of the triangle are already covered off to a certain extent. So they're starting CrossFit from the middle outwards, but they already have a well to draw from in the strength domain, in range of motion, in cardio, or any of those areas. You know, I wish Gabe had given Gabriel Quinville had given the thumbs up to this talk, and seemed like he might pop in here for a minute to listen in. I was going to give him a shout out because Gabe goes down in my mind in history as one of those athletes that outperformed all expectations in an open workout when he first joined the gym. It was the year that the burpee box jumps, dumbbell snatches workout came out. It was the first dumbbell snatch workout I can remember in a CrossFit Open. And he destroyed that workout well beyond his experience level in CrossFit. And I would argue that he had an adequate, and he will even admit, just barely adequate level of strength to snatch that dumbbell, but he had cardiorespiratory endurance that blew most of us out of the water. And that was a very cardio-based workout because the games and the open test the edges more than the center. And he did very, very well because of it. That's, you know, the example. So I think we can take this as an example of the gym and say, yeah, we can see this in application with our clients. So that's the integrated model of fitness. And, I'll say that forms the bulk of what I want to talk about tonight. Everything else from here is kind of a breeze, so to speak, because this is all made up. And yeah, we'll hopefully get some comments at the end. So next, I'm really briefly going to talk about physical stewardship. Now, physical stewardship is a term that I've kind of co-opted from the military. Stewardship is language we use to describe how we take care of our resources, our personnel, vehicles, and equipment. Maintain them so that they work when we want them to work. I like the term physical stewardship because it's about taking care of your body. So maintaining it so it works when you want it to work. And that happens really through three main mechanisms that we're all super familiar with, and could probably breeze through this in no time. It's also not a huge focus of this talk because these topics are things you could talk about for hours at a time. And those three parts are nutrition, hydration, and sleep and relaxation. Whoop bands and Whoop straps are all the rage these days. I've seen about 400 advertisements for them on my Facebook and Instagram. In the last 2 months, I must have said the word Whoop out loud at least once or twice. And that whole system is really designed around measuring variables related to these stewardship factors. So they measure your sleep quality and your duration, your relaxation, your downtime, your heart rate. You can log things like your hydration level and your nutrition, your macros, how many calories you're consuming, and it measures your stress, your body's, your system-wide stress through HRV and a few other factors. And it pumps out a number that tells you, okay, like what's your preparedness for training today? And that's really a quantitative envelope around the idea of physical stewardship. For the purpose of keeping it super simple, I'll describe very quickly what these three things are, and we'll move on to the more fun psychological fitness part. So nutrition, we're talking about correct balance of calories for our energy demands, balanced macronutrients that meet our body composition goals, sufficient micronutrients that give us all the vitamins and minerals we need to be happy and healthy, and mostly whole foods, not processed. Okay, not super difficult, but we could talk about nutrition for probably another hour or two if we really wanted to. Sleep and relaxation, we're talking about rest days off from heavy training stress so that the body can adapt, recover, and repair tissue, which again is sometimes a deficit in CrossFitters who are really like CrossFit. And sometimes they aren't great at taking the days actually required to repair and rebuild tissue, which basically means that you're putting a lot of effort in, but not getting a whole lot of benefit out of it if you're not actually getting stronger or giving yourself time to repair. Consistent sleep schedule, circadian rhythms, 7+ hours of sleep, more the harder you train, and periods of low activity that don't expend tons of extra calories for no reason. And then hydration, we're talking about managing water intake, managing caffeine intake, and having sufficient electrolytes in our system to keep everything else moving. And beyond that, I think this overview, I don't think talking about the physical stewardship characteristics really needs a lot more time tonight. And lastly, the last part of what I want to throw into this chat, maybe even bit off more than I could chew, considering how long I spent on physical fitness, is psychological fitness. And I will go through this as quickly as I can, only because I don't want to keep everyone too long and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But I will also caution that this is a topic I could talk about for hours and hours and hours because this is my area of expertise. So I could get very, very detailed or not. So I'm talking about psychological health and fitness. Psychological fitness, very basically defined, is very, very similar to how we perceive and think about physical fitness. It's basically the same concept, except ported to the mind. We work hard at it, we get better, you can train it, but most of the things we think about physical fitness carry over. Secondly, psychological fitness is non-clinical in nature. It's non-clinical in nature. Just like we talk about physical fitness is non-medical in nature, psychological fitness is non-clinical in nature in that it is not diagnostic. Talking about these concepts, evaluating your own position in these concepts is not diagnostic of any evaluated clinical disorder. It's not acute care. If someone is dealing with a psychological or mental injury. These are not things that are going to solve that problem. That individual needs specific acute care, and this topic is not that. All right. So a bit of a disclaimer. Psychological fitness falls on the intervention continuum a lot like physical fitness does. So if we think about interventions to injury or stress or, whatever kind of concept we want to work with here, primary interventions are things that change the stimulus. They get rid of the problem. Secondary interventions change the way we see the problem or we deal with it. And tertiary interventions are the ones that deal with the outcomes. That is, address the symptoms or solve the injuries after the fact. So when we think about psychological fitness, it is really a secondary intervention in the sense that it's not changing the stimulus, the things you experience in everyday life necessarily. It's changing the way you frame them, think about them, or the resources you have available to deal with them. I'll dig into that a little bit more. A quick primer on what stress is. So first, people use the term stress to describe the entire stress experience, but stress itself is an interactive process. It is not a single thing. It is not an outcome. So I'll get back to that in a second. A stressor is a stimulus that creates stress. It's causing damage. It's taxing your resources. It's having an impact on you. Resources are things that you have access to, psychological, quantifiable, or material that will change the way that the stressor impacts you or the way you think about it. Perception and cognition play a huge role in stress because we appraise, we think about, we evaluate every stimulus that we experience. And the way we think about that thing drastically changes the impact or outcome. Stress also varies in intensity and duration. So we think of those as chronic or acute stressors, and that's again very medical language. But chronic stressors are things that are persistent, typically of lower intensity. They're things that happen every day. So like you can think of things like financial pressures, unhappy relationships, bad boss at work. These are chronic stressors, usually of a slightly lower intensity, but they're persistent, and often they're the most harmful to us long term because of that. Acute stressors are usually of high intensity, momentary, and typically cannot be repeating by their nature. So we think of this as things like death in a family, an accident, very, very stressful in the moment, but unlikely to reoccur, not persistent. And usually once you're past that point, there's not much more thought given to that thing, except for like some residual trauma or related issues from it. But it's not persistent in the sense that the actual stimulus isn't always there. Strain, on the other hand, is the outcome of stress. It can manifest in many ways, but it's how stress impacts us. It's things like physiological outcomes, psychological outcomes, and behavioral outcomes. And there's a few examples there on the slide that I'm not going to spend too much time on here right now. In the transactional model of stress, it basically states, again, these are theories, these are the things we think about as kind of models for understanding something. It basically states that you experience a stimulus, that is the stressor. We evaluate how threatening it is based on the resources we have right away. Then we appraise our coping resources and we determine what resources, monetary, psychological, support, or otherwise, can help us deal with this stressor. And that's our secondary appraisal process. And then there's some kind of outcome. So it looks something like this on paper. It's kind of a flow path, right? So there's a stressor, we appraise it, how threatening is this thing? Then we experience some perceived stress based on how threatening we perceive it to be. And then we think about all the resources or actions we can take to resolve it. And then based on those things, some kind of outcome happens at a high level. That's, it kind of really drilled down. Psychological fitness in that context is almost identical to physical fitness. It's the ability to meet the psychological demands imposed on you by your environment. It's, do we have the psychological resources or other, the supports to deal with the demands being made of our psyche, of our psychology? You can think about it as gotta go back one more there. You can think about it as an effort to improve quality of life and hedge against chronic psychological disease. You know, many of the aspects of physical fitness definitions carry over quite directly to the way we think about psychological fitness. So when we're talking about protecting psychological well-being from any number of stressors, chronic or otherwise, there's really 4 categories of things, you know, at least identifiable elements in comparison to what we covered in physical fitness so far, that really factor into our psychological fitness. And these are things that you can train and things you can develop over time through practice or effort. So again, that parallel carries over. You know, I've thrown some examples up for the purpose of the slide, but basically demonstrating or trying to express that these stressors can harm us. They can be harmful, and we have to build up defense against them. We have to do something to prepare ourselves for the demands of our environment as they're out there. And don't get too hung up on the specific examples I chose. I just threw stressors that came to me off the top of my head in some bubbles and threw them on a piece of paper. So you'd have something pretty to look at. Right. So in the sense of understanding psychological fitness, it's actually a really new field of psychology. It's something that, you know, I'm on the really early edge of, or was on the really early edge of when I was still in a research department when I was working on this full time. And this is as recent as 5 years ago. So this is not old ideas. These are very new. The way of thinking about psychological fitness in the same context as physical fitness is a very new concept. There's been many versions of this over time that haven't really met all the criteria for a big theory. So we think about things like resilience. Resilience is a very small facet of psychological fitness. It tends to be more of an outcome. That is, you become resilient by practicing psychological fitness, at least the way we conceptualize it now. But resilience was very much all the rage in the early 2010s. It was talked about a lot. Right now it's grit. People are talking about grit a lot. Again, grit is really more a combination of personality and lived experience. So it tends to be not really in a frame of reference that allows you to train it or practice it or get better at it. And again, that's not particularly helpful when we come to a field environment and we talk about how it impacts our clients. So I've thrown some examples up of the elements of psychological well-being, at least as we understand them right now, and some of the training components that go along with them. And I'll dig into some of these in a little bit of detail, but I won't spend too much time here. So if we think about the element of psychological fitness, the practice, the skill of resource management, we're talking about managing psychological resources. I'll zero in on resource guarding. The concept of resource guarding is one you take from nature, right? So people protect their dinner. That's the idea in nature, resource guarding. The interesting thing is that we can use strategies of psychological resource guarding in real life. So you can say no to social events that cause you stress or won't make you happy. You know, you can draw clear boundaries with coworkers, friends, or colleagues that when they're harming you or they're being unpolite or they're taking your effort for granted, right? All of those activities are efforts to guard your psychological resources, and they're valuable, and you can practice that skill as a psychological fitness element. Stock taking in the same category is basically evaluating what resources you have access to, your psychological resources, where they are right now, and what strategies you might have to use to improve them. Active stress management is doing things that decrease your stress load, that you know are decrease your stress, because you're managing that resource. You're decreasing the amount of stress and therefore need fewer resources to combat that stress, psychologically speaking. Expression, authenticity, being your authentic self, fulfillment, doing things that you find fulfilling, deeply rewarding, exploring new ideas, learning, and mastery. That's all in expression. Expressing the true you, that's a big part of psychological fitness. Psychological capital is an old concept that's been kind of pulled into psychological fitness. You know, this really comes from the positive psychology movement. 4 components: hope, optimism, resilience, and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your confidence in performing a given task or set of tasks. your comfort level with that thing, how much you think you're likely to succeed. Resilience is in there. Like I said, it got pulled into this. Optimism and hope. Optimism and hope are really interesting. Hope in particular, because hope triggers planning. So practicing hope can really trigger our ability to start to think about the future, plan, and set goals that lead us to a thing down the road that either gives us more psychological resources, improves our social networks, decreases stress, and in many ways improves our psychological fitness. And it's interesting that meditation journals and guides and diagrams often cue in heavily on hope and optimism as practice skills in those pieces. Because they work really well on paper with limited outside input. So they tend to appear a lot in those kind of meditation journals. And then social support in and of itself is a component or element of psychological fitness. And that looks different for many different people. But it's things like network building. So having broad social networks and access to a greater pool of minds or psychological resources than your own. Fortifying your social networks. That is like shoring up. You think of sandbagging against a flood. It's like strengthening individual relationships with key people in your lives that will protect you psychologically if something very bad happens, right? So like you have someone you can talk to about finances or other things. That's fortifying a specific relationship that assists you long-term. Grounding in reality. So social relationships, among many other things, help keep us grounded in where we are today. One of the dangers of being solo all the time is you lose touch with reality. In many senses, sometimes it can be positive and sometimes it can be negative. So like sometimes you can think things are way worse than they are because you're not grounded in the current moment. And sometimes you can think things are way better for you or more permanent than they are. The idea of, sitting on top of the rainbow and getting pushed off, so to speak. And then exponential action is the idea that broader social networks with more resources can allow you to amplify an action you may need to take more than just the quantity of the size of the relationship. Let's see if I can come up with a good example on the fly for that, since I didn't really prepare one. So, think of this as like more the who you know and what they have access to kind of phenomenon. But for instance, if you were to find out during a pandemic that you lost your employment and you had to crowdsource new employment, a broader, more fortified social network allows you access to potentially far more job opportunities than what you could access on your own. So you get access to exponential resources in some senses by maintaining social networks that are valuable. And how you maintain those social networks, how you express yourself, how you develop psychological capital, how you manage your resources doesn't matter. Just like the elements of fitness, how you train them doesn't matter. It's that they're trained. It's that they're covered off, that the points are covered, like our base elements of physical fitness. You don't have to go out downtown drinking every night to have a social network. There are many ways to maintain a social network. Coming to a place like Ironstone, thankfully, is one of those ways that you can maintain a social network. We're all in this chat together for a reason. Same with psychological capital, right? You can develop self-efficacy in many ways, but in a place like Ironstone, where you repeat the same activity and get better and better and better at that thing through practice, you develop self-efficacy in that domain, and that carries over in other parts of your life. And it's interesting to see how, when you start to really piece it out, you can see how fitness and psychological fitness, physical fitness, the practices, pursuits related to it, and psychological fitness are very heavily linked, especially as it relates to community spaces like Ironstone, where we're really group-based and have more opportunity for social support. So how's it all related? We've covered a lot of that stuff along the way. So I'm just going to say 3 things to kind of close out, and then I'm going to stop talking and hang out, take some questions, maybe drink some of my drink that I didn't actually drink during this talk because I've been talking too much. So first, the 3 layers are there, right? So the triangle, the green triangle, is your physical fitness. The gray circle is your physical stewardship, and your pink square is your psychological fitness. We support from the inside out, all right? So physical fitness supports your ability to maintain physical stewardship, and that supports your ability to maintain psychological fitness. That's a supportive directional relationship. So as an example, when you're physically active, you tend to have a better circadian rhythm. You tend to go to bed on time, at the same time more frequently. You tend to have more innate nutrition needs, and your body gives you better warning signs when it's time to eat. That's an example of how that support relationship works. It supports your need for physical stewardship, and more importantly, psychological fitness all the way to the outside edge, right? We talked about the ways that physical fitness ties into psychological fitness in that direction. We protect from the outside in. So if you are not maintaining your psychological fitness, we often see that in degradations in your physical stewardship, how you take care of yourself, and in your physical fitness, how you train and your body actually performs in the gym. We protect from the outside in. So the follow-on to that is, just like injuries, we talk about mobility, stability injuries in the gym. When we have a knee injury, Eric's on the call here as an athletic therapist. He's going to look upstream, downstream. If you have a knee injury, he's going to look at your ankle. He's going to look at your hip. He's going to say, what's going on here? Like, rarely are knees where we have the pain the thing that had the problem, unless you're playing a soccer game. I wish Tanya was on the call right now and someone kicked you at the side of the knee and tore your ACL. That's different. That's an acute injury. But most of the time when we have chronic injuries related to something, chronic issues, we need to look upstream and downstream. And the same is true of our overall fitness, right? So if we're having issues with getting to the gym and training, the answer isn't, I just need to schedule more time to train. I need to make a habit around training. You have to look upstream. You have to look at physical stewardship. You have to say, am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? Am I eating? Because if you're not doing any of those things, you're going to be very lethargic. You're not going to have energy. It's going to be very difficult to maintain some kind of routine that looks like going to the gym on a regular basis. You have to look at your psychological fitness on the outside layer and look way upstream and go, okay, what parts of my psychological fitness am I not taking care of? What resources am I not protecting? And is that harming me downstream in my ability to maintain my physical fitness? And the same is true if you're all the way up at the top, right? We're looking at support relationships to go, okay, my psychological fitness is seemingly suffering a little bit right now. I haven't been practicing these things and I don't feel great. I'm not feeling my best. Let's look downstream. What am I not doing to support my psychological fitness? What parts of my body am I not taking care of through stewardship? How am I not maintaining my physical health through physical fitness in the gym? So you look upstream, downstream of the model and you go, okay, what pieces are missing? And I think that is the biggest takeaway from thinking about this as an integrated model of fitness, is that we often try to give simple solutions to complex problems when it comes to how clients are successful or not successful, able to maintain their commitments to fitness, whether it's with us or any other gym or fitness pursuit. We often want to give simple solutions. We want to say, we'll just book a schedule, just book time on Pike and you'll make it to the gym. And they're like, well, I end up working late every night. And then the answer is, from a friend or from a coach, it can be as simple as, we'll just book it in Pike and you'll have to come to the gym then. No, the answer is way upstream. Psychological fitness, resource guarding, set clear boundaries with your work. That's where it has to start, right? You have to go all the way upstream and solve the problem that's impairing your physical fitness. So I think that if I was to give a takeaway, it's that, it's never a simple answer, and you can use this model to kind of, in a way, I won't say diagnose, because this is non-diagnostic in nature, but you can think through the problem at a higher level than just make time to go to the gym or not, make time for nutrition or not. And that is all I have to say tonight. I'm going to turn off presenter mode. Dave, how do I turn off presenter mode? Stop sharing. There it is up at the top. It's hidden in a little ribbon. Got it. I'm done talking. And the awkward part about virtual calls like this is I'm not in a room at a university where I can look at people in the eye and say, hey, do you have something to say right now? Or does anyone want to chat about this? I'm just going to sit here and people can talk or not, and that's fine.
I have a question or discussion point.
Please go.
Yeah. So just talking about that upstream, downstream between the three parts of maintaining our overall fitness. What about when, I know you mentioned, oh, if someone's really busy and they keep saying they're working late, you need to look upstream, downstream, but there are times, I mean, specifically for me, or there might be a 2 to 3 week period where I am prioritizing something that's not my physical fitness for a short amount of time. Do you have any like comments, or I don't know if anyone has comments about kind of when you're focusing on different parts of your fitness, or you need to take away from one for some period of time?
So quick show of, I think there's a hands function here. Quick show of thumbs up or hands. Who's had to do that before and hated it? Had to not go to the gym to take care of other parts of their life? Lots of people, I'm sure. Give me thumbs up on screen. Yeah, so like that's super common, and in the short term, that can be adaptive. That's the problem with all things, that the dose makes the poison. It can be very adaptive to do that in the short term if you have other things that are a higher priority that you need to take care of in order for your life to make sense, to be successful, to meet other aspects of your psychological resources. So like being successful at work, having access to financial resources because of that, and stability, progress, sense of accomplishment, all those things matter in your psyche just as much as your physical fitness does to your body. So in short term, yeah, you have to prioritize those things over your physical fitness. The problem with negative spirals, though, is they happen slowly over time, right? We start to always prioritize our work over our fitness, and we lose that support. We lose that supporting foundation, the thing that is holding our psychological fitness and our physical stewardship together, right? So it's not simple. It's not an easy answer. You can't say do it or don't, because you have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But what can happen is a pattern of behavior where you or anyone on this call or anyone in general starts to consistently prioritize other things over their physical fitness, and they lose that core part of their support from inside the model, I guess.
So to your point, Pat, I think that one of the things that's really hard from a societal perspective is that we're not conditioned to prioritize our physical fitness over those other life priorities that we have. And it's bringing that into balance. That's probably one of our largest psychological fitness challenges.
Yeah, I agree. There's lots of nodding heads as well. That's super commonplace. I can take that very personal, and I can carry that over to my work. Like in the Army, it's still, despite the fact that we say fitness is a core part of our job, like everyone works late, everyone skips the gym. It's just kind of what we do. Always there looking on the screen. I know that's what doctors do. Like, it's how it is, right? That's a societal norm. The benefit, the idea of doing talks like this, of taking field knowledge and putting it out there to groups of people like the membership, is that you try and penetrate that norm in small doses. We have a lot of executives, managers, CEOs, professionals, and doctors on this call right now, and nurses and physiotherapists that work with their peers to set norms in their workplace. The idea is that you push this knowledge out as much as you can, wherever you can, and you hope that little groups of people latch onto it, and you can steadily change this norm over time. I'm going to hang out for a little bit longer and stare at black squares. And if anyone wants to chat, say anything.
I'll ask a question. So the nerd in me, as you've alluded to, loves the model. I think it describes it puts into kind of pictures a lot of what people think about when they think about different modalities of sport and fitness. So I guess, I'm not sure if this is too pointed a question, but do you think, based on the model that you've portrayed, that that is what Ironstone delivers? And if not, what do you need to change to make it get there?
That is an excellent question. I'll answer in probably several parts, and then probably even more when I think about it later and get back to you. But the answer is no, we haven't always delivered that. We have at times over prioritized parts of fitness. In the early days of Ironstone, I would say we over prioritized strength. Retrospectively, I can say that pretty confidently, at least in our regular flow of group classes, in our rhythm. Now I would say I think we have the balance in our CrossFit classes pretty close to where I want to see it as far as the programming quality. And our overall program portfolio at Ironstone has built out the corners. So we have the build class that addresses the strength piece. We have the burn class specifically focused on the cardio piece, and we have mobility and yoga and some of that take-home video stuff. So we have the tools to work on individual components inside that model now. The previous iteration of that was trying to set up a group class program that did that for the general public. So if you remember the last version of the balance classes, we had kind of the strength interval class, kind of the HIIT interval class, and then, more yoga on the schedule. I'd say that we got too far away from our core business at that point, and we really got into almost like having a business within the business, a separate thing. And that gave us access to fewer clients, unfortunately, because it was a business within a business. You had to already come into Ironstone to know that existed or to be attracted into that thing. It was very difficult, and it didn't appeal to the broader public of people we have. So I think now with the portfolio of things we've built, I could take a client, take a random example. I could take a client that walks in on day one that has no fitness at all, has never been into a gym a day in their life, and say, should you start CrossFit tomorrow? My answer right now is no, based on where I'm at in my knowledge building process. I love CrossFit. I think it's for everybody, but I would start them with a month of burn and build. Let's work on the basic archetypes of strength. Let's work on the basics of cardiorespiratory endurance. Let's assess your mobility and your injury risk. Let's build some kind of base triangle around you as an individual, some protective bubble to your fitness. If that's a month, if that's 6 weeks, if that's 2 months, you've never exercised before. And then let's introduce higher skill components from the middle outwards, and then your fitness can really take off. But I don't know if I would take someone that's never been to the gym before and just put them right in the middle of the triangle and say, you're here, and based on what I know, it's going to take you 18 months to get from here to the outside edges of this triangle where you're happy with your progress. 18 months is a long time to be committed to a new thing without seeing any progress. And I think we can do a better job of managing that for new clients. Now, if you were a high-level varsity athlete and you already have some of those corners built out, great, plunk, we'll drop you in there in the middle and we'll see what happens, right? If you're really motivated, you want to try all these things, it's what you saw on TV and you understand the context of what we're putting you into, drop you right in the middle. But I think for the average new through the door client, we can think about this a little bit better because of at least where I think I'm at in my understanding of this right now. Who's ever heard the saying, I need to get fit to start CrossFit before? It's out there. It's a myth that trainers hear a lot as reasons why people don't start.
Well,
I think we're
CrossFit, but going to any gym. Like, I don't want to go to the gym because I am not fit. Like, that's such a thing. People are intimidated by walking into a gym because they're not fit. If I didn't have people goad me to going into CrossFit, I would never be where I am today.
Kowalski.
Heather Kowalski, whoever you are.
I think, Pat, part of that, like, CrossFit almost has itself to blame in a way for that whole saying, right? People thinking that they need to get fit to go to CrossFit is that CrossFit is so centered around people having this like precise measurement of every single thing they do. And not only that, they're not only measuring themselves against themselves, but against everybody else in the class. They're writing their times on the whiteboard. It's very difficult for most people to bring themselves to the idea of writing their name at the bottom of the leaderboard every single time when they start these classes, right? So it's kind of, I think CrossFit, and don't get me wrong, I like working out in that style, but I think it's kind of got itself to blame for that saying.
Yeah, that approach works really well when you're on the fringes of fitness and your potential client group is really small, because there will be a sufficient number of clients that idea appeals to, for you to be healthy and successful, and for the market to accept you as kind of the fringe thing you are. CrossFit's matured and it's changing, right? We see more modern approaches to fitness being incorporated. We see, the way people train for the games is very different now than it used to be, as far as like the high level athletes. And we see gyms operating in very different ways compared to previous. I think you'll also see that corporate's changing eminently. I've had a number of calls with headquarters and people in headquarters staff in the last 2 months for a lot of reasons, which I probably won't dig into a lot right now. But even the whole like thought process and the way they do business is changing a lot to address some of those things, to be more inclusive, to be more diverse. One of the things we're thinking about piloting, and we're going to try it out, it's kind of, I think, where we want to head, Kat's on the call, or was at some point, is we're going to take a stab at seeing if we can get rid of RX weights and loading for a little bit, prescribed weights. And the reason you want to do that is because prescribed weights are a trap for a lot of people. They see a number on the board and they think the number they have to do in the workout is that number on the board. And like I talked about when I talked about moving the epicenter of the power circle, not scaling appropriately, that becomes this recurring trap where people lift too heavy for their level of ability. It's not a power focused workout anymore. It is now a strength workout where they're breathing heavy in between reps. And they don't make progress towards their overall fitness at the rate they should, because they're missing the boat on scaling, or injury, or many other things related to that. And the converse also happens. People miss the boat on scaling by going too light, because they have a number in their head, that they think is the appropriate number based on what's written on the board. And they consistently underdo the stimulus, and it's more cardio based, and it's not really as power based as it should be. So the idea of trialing getting rid of our RX weights, what would that look like? Well, we recommend a percentage or an RPE, how many reps you should be able to do in one set or 2 sets. And you go by feel. And we try it out for 2 or 3 weeks and we see what people think. Because I think for the most part, the idea of an RX weight, write it for the best athletes in the gym and scale down for everybody else, is a good idea in theory when you're coaching 1-on-1 or 1-on-3 or 1-on-5. But when you're coaching 1-on-18, 1-on-15 in a group class, it's very difficult to get that stimulus right for everybody. So we're going to try to see just another way. And to your other point, we've never written times on the physical whiteboard and made people yell out, hit the time cap, 17:11. In a class setting, because that one was recognizable from the beginning, at least from our perspective. But other things like no RX weights, that's different. And yeah, we'll see where it goes. Elise, do you have any resource recommendations similar to the CrossFit training manual as a gateway for learning about psychological fitness? Yes, it's going to be a series of research articles and a textbook I might have a PDF of, and I will do a quick hunt to see which of my audiobooks fall into this category, because I've probably got so many. The honest truth is, though, is there's going to be very few manual type documents that are really researched and evidence-based, because most of that knowledge I just put on paper lives in many research PDFs over many journals that have been kind of condensed by my brain over time into a PowerPoint slide, but just based on my own work. And most of the PDF guides you're going to find are very like MBA management kind of PDF guides, where they're going to be very topical. So if you're looking for something a little bit more detailed, that's not going to be it. I will make a nice little list and see if I can post that in the Facebook group for further reading. And a lot of those PDFs I probably still have access to. So I'll post a couple that might be of particular interest. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for listening to me say words for a long time. Yeah, good use of a snowy Thursday. I'm probably going to go shovel now. Some of you might have to do the same. I don't know. We'll see.
Thanks, Pat.
Pat.
Thanks, Pat. Miss you guys.